Welcome to the Roller Coaster Ride of Parenting podcast. I'm Jenny.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Susanna. And we'll be your hosts as we discuss the highs and the lows of the parenting journey.
We'll be having conversations based on the content from Susanna's book, A Childcare Expert's Guide to Enjoying Your Parenting. Throughout her time as a childcare owner and operator, Susanna has encountered many overwhelmed parents, and she wrote this book to encourage and equip them to be the best parents they can be.
This podcast is an opportunity to share more tips and tricks around the challenges that parents face. It's our hope that through our shared knowledge, experiences, and conversations, we help you to better embrace your parenting and enjoy your roller coaster ride.
Welcome back to the podcast. This week we'll be focusing on the impacts of technology on children and discussing how to protect and safeguard them within an increasingly technological world. We'll be joined by special guest Katie Kobler, director of Your Choicez. Over her years as a professional speaker, she has been able to reach and encourage thousands of students, parents, and teachers, and we're so excited for her to be joining us in our conversation today. And just a warning up front, we will be talking about sex, so if you have little ones that you don't want to hear some of those conversations, maybe you want to pause and put the podcast back on in 5 minutes, but we'll keep going with the show. So Jen, for you, when it comes to technology, what's your favourite Netflix show, my friend?
Favorite Netflix show? Did you know that it's actually not Netflix, but at the moment I've been watching all of the Friends series again on Stan.
Wow,
so
that's
it's
very
just
nostalgic of you.
It's my COVID special at the moment. I'm up to season 6.
Wow.
I'm pretty proud of myself.
What is Stand?
It's kind of like Netflix, but just
Okay.
another one.
Rob
What's
and I are
yours?
only just up to Netflix. We've only just started.
What are you guys watching?
I'm watching the Michael Jordan one at the moment on Netflix.
Oh.
Yeah, I need to go home. But so that's one season. You've done 6 seasons, my friend. That's a lot of COVID staying in. I'm just going to shame you around.
Hey,
your
listen.
huge
I've had
technology
a lot
needs right now.
No. I've had a lot of extroversion to redirect is what's happening. It's a problem. Not shamed at all. I'm coping. It's good.
Well, we're in isolation period.
I know.
So you've got a good reason, Jen.
I've actually been streaming Friends while baking sourdough with the rest of the
there
world.
you go.
Right.
There you go.
Sweet ass. So we have a special guest today. Why don't you introduce Katie?
Oh, okay. So Katie is one of my favorite people. I know she gives excellent advice to crowds of students and their parents, but I think some of the best advice I've gotten around parenting and some of the things like in this space with my kids has been over like a dinner table with Katie. You're a mom of 3.
I am.
Do
you want me to talk?
Yes. Yes.
I'm like not talking. Yes,
Definitely welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Yeah, I do have 3 children. I have a 3-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old. They're pretty epic, but I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I have so many questions. Like I have so many questions to ask you just because you're here, so it's very exciting. But we were talking before we started and around some of the ways we've looked at using technology with our kids the way we have. And I think like I have a really weird perspective on this because my family are all overseas. So it's one of those things that for me, I just think, like my kids have had dinner with their grandparents on an iPad screen since they were 18 months old.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it's one of those opportunities to connect. Like there's a lot of spaces. Like my kids used to run around the house and they would put the iPad in the rubbish bin and giggle that they put their grandmother in the rubbish bin. And my mom would be going, oh my gosh, it's so dark in here. You know, so it's been that it's beautiful. But then at the same time, it's one of the spaces we need to manage really wisely. Like, I don't know. Like, what do you think is an appropriate age to start letting your kids play with the phone or play with a device?
Yeah, look, I think for every family it's very different. And I think you're right. The challenge that we have, because there's so many dangers in this space, that we can kind of make it all bad. But the truth of it is there's so many wonderful things online. And I think one of the roles that we have as parents is to help our kids use technology for good. One of the things that we try and do is our eldest son, who's 9, who can he knows how to spell and stuff. We encourage him if we go to a cafe or we go to a restaurant and he really enjoys it to write a positive review during this kind of COVID, we're all in lockdown and haven't been going to school. I said to him, who are 3 friends that you can think of or 3 people in your class that you can think of that maybe might not have other people organising Skype or Zoom dates with them? Why don't you send them an encouraging message? And so I think it's our role as parents to there are so many things to be cautious around and to be to put precautions in place. But there's also wonderful things like talking to grandma. I mean, how amazing is that?
Yeah.
I mean, we're the same. My sister's in London and she's got 3 kids and the kids know each other. She's, 3 kids and they're cousins and they love each other and they have warm relationships because they've been able to connect through technology. And so there's so many wonderful things. But I think helping kids to be, we call it digital citizenship, to be wonderful, and in the same way we want kids offline to be empathetic and kind and encouraging, we need to be helping our kids to navigate that space. And the challenge that we face is that often kids are kind of thrown a device and left to their own, to figure it out on their own, and we can't expect kids to do that.
No.
We teach our kids to cross the road, look to the right, look to the left. But sometimes I think it's because it's new. It's new for us. Like my parents didn't parent me around how to manage a device because there weren't any,
Exactly.
And so what we need to be doing is really just taking pause and thinking through, well, how do I want my child to respond online? What do I want them? How do I want them to behave? And we actually have to change our own behavior in order to raise children who will be wonderful digital citizens. And so,
it is really interesting. I was just thinking, really even the age, and they're really proficient at devices. Like I remember, so Max is 9 now, and I always laugh because when he was about 2.5, maybe 2.5, 3, my mother-in-law called and it was about 9:00 and she said, "Oh, what's Max doing?" And I was like, "He's been in bed for hours." And he's sleeping because I'm a great mom. And she was like, "Well, he's actually FaceTiming his granddad right now." And I was like, "What?" So I was carrying her on the phone to his bedroom, and I heard him he said, "Just a second, Stevie." And he put the iPad under his pillow and laid on his pillow and started going, "Shh, shh." And I was like, "You tiny little thing." So I was like, "Oh, that's really interesting." So I was like, "You need to only use the iPads when mom and dad are around." That's an important rule that we need to learn at 2.5. And then we started going, okay, well, iPads don't go in rooms. They go on top of the fridge at night. There's boundaries around it. But it's one of those things you kind of you run into them when your mother-in-law calls you to tell you about it. So
totally. Yeah, it's a big one. It is. And we talk about setting time boundaries as far as how long do we want our child head down, straight on neck, looking down at a device. And again, every family is different. Every situation is different. So the length of time, but also the time of day. And so, we suggest to parents that they set parameters around, well, what time, for us, we don't really want our kids looking at technology after 7:00. And for teenagers, or parents of teens, we always really encourage, don't let them take their devices into their bedrooms. There's this time, actually, it's kind of confronting, but one of the huge most successful porn companies in the world release data around the time of day that people are accessing online pornography. And the most common time is actually 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. It's really interesting. I call it the 10 p.m. trap. And it's really interesting because even when I'm talking to girls and I'll say to them, what's the most problematic time for beating yourselves up about your body? Girls will say 11 p.m. One will say 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. And it's just this time when mum and dad have gone to bed, the Wi-Fi is still on because nobody's thought to turn it off. And, young people are falling asleep with their phones beside them and can be struggling, yes, with body image, but also, of course, with accessing pornography, this kind of damaging content, also bullying. And the challenge is, of course, if it's the last thing, it's also the first thing. And we find that this stuff, whatever it is that they're struggling in this space, it's quite literally framing their existence. And so, yeah, it's huge. And you're right. It's figuring that out at 2.5 because it's like so often we get calls from parents, my child is 13, they're accessing pornography. They've always fallen asleep with their phones or their iPads or whatever. How do I do this now? And it's really challenging to make those changes at 13. And so we always encourage, make bedrooms a device-free zone. And that's for parents as well. Setting that precedent. And so, like I said, it's big because we haven't had to figure this out, but we kind of do have to figure it out now to protect our kids. And they deserve it. They deserve protection. Yeah.
I always think that your generation, really, you're the pioneers in this.
Yes.
And so it is a big thing for you because you don't have a role model on this. So you're the first ones in the ring, so to speak.
To parent.
In parenting with these devices. Yeah. And so I think that what I would encourage parents with, though, is what I say about most things, they will catch much more than what they're taught. So I agree with you that if you're going to have bedrooms to be free of devices, that has to include your bedroom.
That's
because the children will soon pick up.
Yeah.
When you've got it's the whole modelling thing, and they'll pick up. Or plus, also, I think children are pretty good at working out what you're looking at too.
That's right.
And what you're involved with on the whole social media thing. So
it's communicating too. I know for me, I try and I have I can do this because of the way my work is framed, but I've got work time and then I try and put my work away and hang out with my kids. And so one of the things I do if I'm quickly responding to an email, and my kid's like, Mummy, and I'm like, I just turn my phone around and say, Mummy's writing an email, so they can see what I'm doing. I'm not just hanging out on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. I'm doing work and I'm going to be finished in a moment. It's just being open and honest because at some point down the track, I'm going to ask them to do the same. So what are you looking at? And I want it to be, this is what we do in our family. We communicate. But it's interesting you say pioneers because we say about young people that they're the guinea pig generation.
Right,
so it's, and it's really interesting to hear you say that, Sue, because it's true where the kids they're figuring it out and what we're finding.
But you're figuring it out at the same time.
We're figuring it out at the same time, But the science is saying that, we've given kids phones, particularly when it comes to pornography, we've given young people phones and haven't really thought it through. But the science is saying that, we think of, I think parents our age, they think of pornography, a Playboy magazine. It's a magazine. It's a few images in a magazine, but the reality is online. It's completely different. And so the science is indicating that young people are paying an incredible price for this kind of early exposure and this heightened and so much exposure. There's a study that said that young people today are exposed to more pornography. They can be exposed to more pornography in one night than what one of their ancestors was in multiple lifetimes.
Wow.
And
that's
so
huge.
It's this changing imagery that we're starting to see the brain science around it. And it's actually, it's quite literally changing young people's brains. And so, it's this kind of guinea pig generation that now we're going, okay, let's figure this out. Let's change the way we're doing this. So,
So if your child's seen an inappropriate image and you become aware of it, what's the healthiest way to respond or most constructive way?
It's such an important question, and it's a question we get all the time, of course. And the first thing that we say is don't shame that child. It's really important. There does typically particularly we find young people who might come from a family of faith, there can be a lot of shame in it anyway. And so it's really important. One of the things we actually encourage parents to do is take it on board yourself. And it's one of the things we do in our seminars is we will say to teenagers, if you have found yourself hooked on pornography, we want to apologize to you because we, as a society, we haven't protected you and we should have. The average age of first exposure is actually 11. Some studies are saying 10.
Wow.
And it's like these little children are being exposed to content that they're not in any way ready to see. This is their introduction to their understanding of sex. And so an apology is appropriate.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think while it's not a parent's fault at all, of course, that their child has seen pornography, it really does just shift the dynamic and the atmosphere in the room when a parent says, I'm really sorry that this has happened. I wish that I could have protected you. What can we do moving ahead? And what it does is it's that empathy. It allows the conversation to evolve. We also really encourage parents to, and it's a little bit, not everyone would agree with this, but to not take the device away, not to say that's it, no phones, no iPads. And that might seem a bit strange, but what we want moving ahead is we want the child to feel free to open up to the parent about the struggles moving ahead. And by removing that device, it feels like a punishment, and it can totally shut down the conversation and the openness. And what might happen for that child is, okay, I'm still struggling, or my friend from school has sent me another link. I can't tell mum and dad because they'll take my phone away. And so we really just encourage, maybe moving back, like, okay, the phone won't be in your room at night, and that's not because you're bad, it's because we want to protect you. Just really being mindful of the way that conversation is had.
So taking the stance of partnership with that child around this
Bury
rather
this
than
together.
a power, that's bad for you, I'm going to remove it.
Yeah.
Which is not realistic anyway, really, is it? I mean, in terms of if the child's even 10 or 11, they'll be able to find access other ways if you're going to just be hard and fast about that. And that often is our reaction to protect. Sometimes we overreact. I mean, I've definitely
it's
done
always
that
our
a number
role
of
to
times.
protect. We always need to protect. It's just about thinking through, well, what's the best way for me to protect? And it's not easy. It's hard.
And I think too that it's the name of this is like the roller coaster ride. And this is part of the roller coaster ride. We're not going to get it right all the time, even around this area. And so I would like to encourage parents not to be fearful, because I think often it's the fear that the parent goes to.
That's right.
For the child.
Yeah.
That they then they overreact.
Yeah.
So how would you help the parents not to have fear around it?
Look, I think the truth of it is, and what research is indicating, we used to say how to protect your child from seeing pornography. The truth of it is they'll all see pornography. That's the world we're living in. And so it's how do we equip our children to navigate that space? And I think it is important to remove fear and to, we always really encourage parents to really start the conversation early. And it's actually a model that we use. It's the SAFER model, and it's start the conversation early, answer questions openly and honestly, frame the conversation, educate, empower, equip, and to have regular conversations in the home. And I think what we really encourage, and what we've done with our kids, and by this it sounds in conversation that you've done with your kids, Jen, which is really cool, is that you have to have these conversations about sex, about pornography, also about sexting, and there's a whole bunch of topics. You have to have these conversations before you think your child is ready. Like I said, the average age of first exposure to pornography is 11, and no one would think they would need to have this conversation with their child before 11. But for me, I wanted to make sure that my children, we haven't had this conversation with our 3-year-old, but I wanted to make sure that if my child saw pornography, that they knew what it was. They knew what I wanted them to do, and they weren't left on their own. And what we find is that what that does, number one, it opens the conversation. It means that I'm the one who's talked to you about this. It means they have the terminology to understand it. It means that when they see something that actually it can be very confusing and scary for a child, they know that's pornography. And even I know how that affects my brain, and I know what to do about it, as opposed to feeling overwhelmed and scared and not quite sure who to talk to. And so, so start the conversation, answer the questions openly and honestly. And that's a really important one. And it can be really challenging because the language that kids are exposed to, the terminology. I remember hearing talking to a beautiful young girl, and she had been on a school bus heading home. Someone had sort of yelled off the back of the bus, sort of a slang term for oral sex, and she didn't know what that was. And so she went home, asked Mum. Mum got very cranky with her because that's rude, that's inappropriate, don't ever ask me that again. And of course, that beautiful little girl went and Googled it, and immediately she was exposed to this world that she wasn't ready for. And so we need to be okay to answer the questions that are in their world. And sometimes it's scary and confronting, and frame the conversation. That's a really important one, because if we don't frame that, and that's about deciding what we believe and what, the world or the way we want our kids to see these topics. For us, my husband and I, we're both Christians, and so we want to frame that from sex and pornography. We want to frame that from that perspective. We want our kids to understand sex as a wonderful thing God created, and so that's really important, because if we don't frame the conversation, if we don't frame these topics, their friends will, or pornography will, or the TV show will. And so it's really important. Educate, empower, equip. It's about helping kids with terminology, and just, for me, it's stuff like consent. It's stuff like understanding, well, what is sexual harassment? It's even racism. It's those kinds of things, giving kids terminology to understand. So if they find themselves in the midst of something, they can go, that's not okay, that's not cool, and I know what that is, and I know what to do about it. And regular conversations, and that's the goal. That's you've got a 16-year-old and they regularly are wanting to come to mum and dad and talk about this stuff, because it's been a conversation in the home forever and a day. And so, we really believe that for parents, this doesn't need to be a fear space. This is, it's just about navigating these topics with our kids and walking it through with them.
So you're an expert in this field, so you naturally know, you have a pretty good handle on how to do that with your children, right?
Yeah.
And you've got the tools.
Yes.
So how do the parents get those tools? When they're not in your position, they're not going to a whole lot of schools, they're not doing presenting a whole lot of seminars and things.
Yep.
How do they get the tools for themselves to know how to put this into place?
Yeah. Look, and I think that's why we've come up with that model, because it's a model that parents can engage with. But I think it's also about reading articles and books and listening to podcasts. They're welcome to come along. We've got a webinar we do every second Friday night where we talk about this stuff. But I think it's one of those things that we need to stay on top of. It's perfectly fine to say to your child, I don't know what that means. I haven't heard that term, but I'm going to get back to you. Let me look into it. Don't you? It's perfectly fine to not have all the answers. Yeah.
So you talked about the webinar.
Yes.
So how would people find out about the webinar or connect with you around that?
If you want to go to our website, which is Your Choicez with a Z, CHOICEZ, don't ask, .com.au. We do have a registration page, and that will be running just sort of whenever, depends when people are listening to this podcast, doesn't it? But we'll have something on our parents page for parents to engage with. But I think it's about committing to that journey with our kids, and our kids are walking through this stuff, and it's about us partnering with our kids to support them through it. And it is challenging. And like you say, I'm reading this stuff all the time. I'm in schools talking about this stuff, and not all parents are.
No.
But it's finding a way through for our kids so that they can have health in this area, because they deserve that.
And that young girl that you talked about on the bus, I feel for her mother as much as I feel for her.
Absolutely.
Because I think the reason her mum potentially was saying, don't speak to me about that again, is because she didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
And again, she had fear.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I'd like to really encourage families to listen to your webinar and other things as well that can train them and teach them well, because you are the pioneers. All you young ones are the pioneers. I didn't have to deal with this as a mother.
Yeah.
And I don't really have to deal with it on the same level as like with my grandchildren, because it's my children that are dealing with it mostly, and I will come under their leadership with that. So I'm not going to open my mouth because I want the parents to be the ones. I will open my mouth in support, but not as the leader of teaching the children around this. And so, I want to encourage you all and champion you all on and say, being a pioneer in anything isn't easy. It's difficult.
Yeah.
And you will make mistakes, but it's okay. It's part of the roller coaster ride. But equip yourself. Learn as much as you can from webinars like yours and other things. And then when the fear's taken out, then potentially they're going to be in the position where you can all help your children so much more and confidently.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting the way you spoke about framing. I guess I hadn't thought about it quite like that, but to give a child context and to give them context about how you're going to react.
Yeah.
In some ways, that takes preparation for that mum. She's probably caught out when her daughter asked her that question.
Yeah.
So in some ways, when I've been a healthy parent, it's often when I have put in the work beforehand to be healthy or to react. I'm able to respond when I've got something to respond with, and I react when I don't.
Totally.
So I haven't done that mum's dumb thing, but I've done other ones.
It's perfectly reasonable to say to your child, look, great. And we always always start with, good question, great question, encourage them. So glad you asked me this. One of the things I recommend is when your child asks that question, say, hey, I really want to answer that question. I'm not going to answer it now. Tonight or sometime in the near future, we're going to eat ice cream. And I'm going to answer that question. And the reason I love that, or we're going to go cafe, have a piece of cake. The reason I love that approach is because it rewards that child for coming to you. Wow. And it communicates to that child, I'm so glad you asked me and I want you always to ask me. And it's just setting up that kind of experience. And that's a wonderful experience for that child to go with that parent and have that conversation. And but it's totally fine to not be able to answer the questions because I get questions from high school students, sometimes, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about, because the world is moving so quickly and because pornography is just so available, kids are exposed to things that are well outside of my knowledge, experience, understanding, thank goodness. And so I have to be able to,
be honest, be vulnerable and say, I don't know the answer, but I'm going to find out for you.
And that's totally fine. Kids really value that. And setting a later date, I think, sometimes even the question might come and it's like, okay, we've got the other kid over there who might not be ready to hear this. And so, it's perfectly fine to say, let's have a chat. I've done it with my son. Tonight, we're going to have a chat before bed. I'll make you a cup of tea. And, so just that's rewarded. Yeah.
I think it's really, I was just thinking that empowering them and really watching their self-esteem in those conversations because, it's often that I'm not going to get it right.
Yeah.
But just that, I think kids are very forgiving if you don't have the right words. But I often think about Max. It's not necessarily in a context of sexuality, but more in watching things that could be scary. It's a good way for seeing how they're going to respond, and how they come to you. Because I think they were watching something at a friend's house. They walked in and they were like, oh, it was really scary and I shouldn't have watched it. And you could tell when he came and he was chatting with me, he thought he was going to be in trouble. Yeah. Immediately he was like, I'm ready to never be able to go back to that kid's house and here's my iPad. It was it was punitive, but he just had to get it off his chest. Yeah. But I just went, and I don't even know. I just went, I'm so glad you told me that. It was one of those, I'm like, that's so good to know. Now that feels awful. That's one of those things. And that's your body's way of keeping you safe. That feeling isn't great. And that's your body's way of telling you that that's not a great thing. Yeah. So next time I'm going to really trust you more that you saw that. Yeah. And so he was like, am I still allowed to go? And I was like, yeah, because you'll shut that down. I trust you. Yeah. So it was because of this conversation and you could see he came kind of coward, I'm so sorry. And then as he left, his little shoulders, went back and he was like, oh, okay. And I could see, he would be the one in the room going, I don't know if this is appropriate, people, with the other little kids. But it's nice. It's nice for them not to be policed but to have the conversation.
Yeah, they're going to have to navigate this stuff, and they're going to find themselves at someone's house and there's a scary movie on, or worse.
I'm glad I had the scary movie, because I don't know if I would have responded as well to porn. But now that we've had that, it's like a learning curve.
Yeah.
So
it's a lead up to it.
Yes,
that's
good.
the thing. We want to protect our kids, but we can through conversation.
Yeah.
But I can't stop my kid from some other kid turning a phone around at school and showing them a scary movie or pornography or whatever. I can't stop my child being a bystander in a sexting scandal. You know, I can't protect them in that space. All I can do is give them the information, the terminology, the know-how. How do I navigate this, and build into them empathy, so that they see. You know, it's actually a really important quality in this space, because, you know, I've got 2 sons and a daughter. I pray for my 2 sons that when they see a naked female on a screen, that they will see her for who she is and not just see her as a body to be consumed. And it's the kind of objectification space is really important for us to navigate as parents, but to understand it. And, you know, a sexting scandal is a classic example. A young person with empathy, or a young man with empathy, would see that photo, immediately think, oh my goodness, what's this like for her? I hope she's okay. And then they'd start to call out the behavior, the bad behavior around them. And that's powerful, you know. And so it's these qualities that we get to build into our children. And it doesn't happen in a day.
But I see, actually, Katie, as much as you say you can't protect them, I see that you actually are protecting them.
Absolutely.
You're not stopping them from seeing the things, but you're protecting them from the damage that could be created.
That's right.
So, you know, and that's what I want to encourage parents with that.
Yeah.
You're actually very powerful in this situation.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
Katie, can I ask you a question? You know how a lot of people say the kids will learn anyhow, and they're not, you know, they think mum and dad know nothing anyhow, and they'd rather learn off other people. They'd rather hear it from their peers and things. Do you agree with that statement?
Look, there's some really interesting research, and one of the things that I find the biggest surprise for me in my work, and it's actually mind-blowing, is, you know, when we first started running seminars in school, I would have parents contacting me, thanks for having this conversation with my kid, and, you know, like asking questions and that kind of thing. And we love that, of course. But the biggest surprise for me has been that 5 years later, I now receive that question just as much from young people as I do from parents. Thanks, Katie. This has been really helpful. I recognize now that I've been navigating this stuff on my own, how do I have this conversation with my mum? I want that person to sit beside me, shoulder to cry on, someone I can ask questions for. And it's this kind of bridge that sometimes just hasn't been built. We find that young people are desperate to have these conversations with parents. An interesting research, US study that looked at teens between the age of 15 and 19 and where do they want to get their information from. And, you know, we might think, well, it would be social media, it would be YouTube, it perhaps would be pornography, but actually 38% of young people, and it was the leading score, 38% of young people said my parents. That's where I get that information, followed by friends and teachers. Friends at 25%, teachers at 9%. And so we do find, and parents are so powerful in this space, and we get this window of opportunity to really guide our kids, encourage our kids, engage with our kids in this space. And so, you're quite right. We do. It's such an encouragement for parents. And the thing I love about this is we hear from adults in our research that we've conducted ourselves, adults who have had those conversations, and they say, you know, I still talk to my mum. I still remember, you know, and for me, I remember as a child, my mum definitely talked to me about this stuff in a really wonderful way. And I still value those conversations that I have with my mum. And it's such a blessing and such a gift that we can have with our kids to help them navigate this space. It's really powerful.
It's good.
Yeah, well. Yeah, I've learnt so much listening to you today. It's really been empowering for me as a parent. Yeah, great. So firstly, thank you so much for being with us today.
Pleasure.
It's been really cool.
Me, guys.
Oh, yeah, no, your insights have been really I was going to say insightful, but I just said insights and insightful. So I need to become a better podcaster, clearly.
Doing great, Ken. Doing very well.
Just before you leave or we finish this part of the conversation, what is something that you would really want to recommend, or what's something that you would like parents to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, I think what I would recommend is, regardless of what age your child is, start the conversation. And, it is important to do that in an age-appropriate way, but just start that conversation with your kid. And it might be a little mention or a book or whatever, but, see yourself as you're the expert in your child's life and engage in that conversation with them.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So, Jen.
Yes, sir.
You're furiously writing away then.
I know. I'm taking all the tips. This is why I love Katie.
Oh, yeah, I can see you got lots. We both got lots out of it. So what was the one thing that you'll take away from today's conversation?
I really like the conversation and really empowering my kids to have the conversation, to ask the questions, making that a really safe space. That's something that I think, when you're doing it, but not necessarily intentionally doing it. So I think that I love the steps. Like, what was the acronym again, Katie?
Safer.
We need to make a link to that somewhere because I need to find that. That was amazing. And I really liked the practical, like the conceptual. I went, oh, this is something that I can do. But the really practical about Wi-Fi at night, showing them what's on my phone. I'm not just in the phone scanning all the time, but that modeling, I think that's super helpful. Yeah. So this is why we love Katie.
Thanks, guys.
So, I guess what was most powerful for me was the fact that there were so many tools. It wasn't just a safer, that it was a showing the phone, that you actually gave us things to think about, like not having, if I don't want my kids to have their phones in the bedroom, I can't do the same thing. There was, I need to go back and listen again. There was lots of things you gave that were very practical. So, I really appreciate that. We're going to finish up now. So thank you so much for being with us, Katie. If you guys want to check out our social medias, you can go to Facebook, where we're Enjoying Parenting. On Instagram, we're at Enjoy Parenting AU. And our next episode is going to be around giving and thankfulness. So we hope you remember to enjoy your parenting roller coaster ride.